There's a moment in Greek mythology that gets glossed over, a detail so small that most retellings skip it entirely, but it reveals everything about one of the most powerful gods in the pantheon. After the war against the Titans ended, after Zeus and his siblings stood victorious over the fallen cosmic order, they drew lots to divide the world between them. Zeus got the sky, Hades got the underworld, Poseidon got the seas. And according to some versions of the story, Poseidon immediately complained, not because the seas were smaller or less valuable than the sky, but because he wanted what Zeus had. The throne, the authority, the recognition as supreme ruler. He wanted to be king, and he spent the rest of eternity bitter that he wasn't. This is Poseidon in a single moment. Powerful beyond measure, essential to civilization, capable of shaking the foundations of the earth itself, and fundamentally unable to accept that he couldn't have everything he wanted. He was the god of the seas, the earth shaker, the storm bringer, one of the three brothers who ruled reality itself. And he was also, in ways that would play out catastrophically across millennia of myth, the divine embodiment of a temper tantrum that never ended. Think about what it means to be the god of the seas in a maritime civilization. The Greeks lived on islands and coastlines. They traveled by ship. They fished for food. They traded across waters. Their entire existence depended on the ocean's mercy. And the ocean had no mercy, because Poseidon had no mercy. He was volatile, unpredictable, dangerous in ways that made even Zeus seem stable by comparison. Zeus might throw lightning when he was angry, but at least you could sometimes predict what would anger him. Poseidon's rage came from nowhere. A sailor might offend him without knowing. A city might fail to sacrifice properly. A hero might simply be too successful, too proud, too blessed by other gods, and Poseidon would respond with storms that swallowed fleets whole, with earthquakes that reduced cities to rubble, with sea monsters that rose from the depths to devour anyone foolish enough to venture onto his waters. The Greeks feared him more than any other god, not because he was evil, but because he was chaos. Pure, undiluted, eternally adolescent chaos wearing a crown and wielding a trident. But before Poseidon became the Earthshaker, before he ruled the seas and commanded storms and created horses from sea foam, he was like his siblings, swallowed, consumed by Kronos moments after birth, trapped in the belly of a titan who was so afraid of prophecy that he ate his own children. Poseidon spent his formative existence in darkness, suspended in the void alongside Hestia, Demeter, Hera, and Hades, waiting for a liberation that might never come. And when Zeus finally freed them, when they emerged into a world at war, Poseidon fought. He fought with the rage of someone who had been imprisoned through no fault of his own, someone who had been denied existence itself, someone who understood that power was the only thing that mattered because everything else could be taken away without warning. The Cyclopes, grateful for their own liberation from Tartarus, forged weapons for the three brothers, lightning for Zeus, a helm of invisibility for Hades, and for Poseidon, a trident. 3 prongs, 3 points, 3 directions of power, and Poseidon learned to use it with devastating effectiveness. During the Titanomachy, Poseidon was essential. He commanded the waters, yes, but more than that, he commanded the earth itself. He would strike the ground with his trident and the earth would split open. He would thrust his weapon into the ocean and tidal waves would rise. He was earthquake and tsunami combined, the god who could reshape geography through sheer violent will. The Titans, ancient and powerful as they were, had never faced anything like the combined force of Zeus's lightning, Hades' strategy, and Poseidon's raw, destructive power. And when the war ended, when the Titans fell, and the three brothers stood ready to divide the cosmos, Poseidon expected recognition. He expected to be acknowledged as essential, as powerful, as deserving of the highest position. And instead, he got the seas. Second place, the consolation prize, the domain that was vast and rich and absolutely crucial to civilization, but wasn't the sky, wasn't the throne, wasn't supreme authority. And Poseidon never forgave Zeus for that. Never forgave the cosmic lottery that made his younger brother king. Never forgave the fact that drawing lots meant his power and contribution didn't matter as much as luck. This resentment became the defining feature of Poseidon's character, the wound that never healed, the grievance that colored every interaction he had with Zeus and with anyone Zeus favored. While Hades accepted his lot and went quietly to rule the underworld, while the other siblings found their roles and settled into them, Poseidon remained angry. He challenged Zeus multiple times. He joined Hera's rebellion and helped bind the king of gods in chains while he slept. He constantly pushed boundaries, constantly tested limits, constantly reminded everyone that he was just as powerful as Zeus and that the only reason Zeus ruled was an accident of lottery. Poseidon was the god who never moved past his anger, never processed his resentment, never matured beyond the rage of someone who believed he deserved more than he received. But here's where Poseidon's story gets complicated, where he stops being just an angry child in a god's body and becomes something more layered. He was genuinely creative, more creative than Zeus, more innovative than any of the Olympians except maybe Athena and Hephaestus. Poseidon didn't just rule the seas, he invented things. He created the horse, one of the most important animals in Greek civilization, born from sea foam and divine will. Different versions of the myth give different explanations. Some say he created horses to impress Demeter. Some say they emerged from his coupling with Medusa before she became a monster. Some say he simply shaped them from waves and gave them to humanity as a gift. But regardless of the specifics, the horse was his creation. And horses changed everything. They changed warfare, transportation, agriculture, the entire structure of human civilization. Poseidon gave humanity one of its most transformative tools, and he got almost no credit for it because everyone was too busy worshipping Zeus. That pattern repeated throughout Poseidon's mythology. He would create something, contribute something, demonstrate his power and creativity in ways that actually benefited civilization, and then he'd be overlooked, overshadowed, ignored in favor of his younger brother who sat on a throne and threw lightning bolts. Poseidon helped build the walls of Troy, working alongside Apollo, creating fortifications so perfect that they became legendary. And when the Trojans refused to pay him for his labor, when King Laomedon broke his oath and insulted the god who had literally built his city's defenses, Poseidon sent a sea monster to destroy them. Was that an overreaction? Absolutely. Was it justified from Poseidon's perspective? Also absolutely. He had worked, had contributed, had used his divine power in service of mortals, and they had betrayed him. So he responded with violence, because violence was the only language he truly understood, the only response that felt proportionate to the constant disrespect he experienced. This is the tragedy of Poseidon. He was capable of great things, but couldn't control his temper long enough to be consistently great. He created horses and then drowned sailors for minor offenses. He helped build cities and then destroyed them with earthquakes when he felt insulted. He had the power to be a force for civilization and progress, but he was too consumed by his own rage, too obsessed with his grievances, too unable to let go of the fact that he wasn't king. And that inability to mature, to process his emotions, to move past his resentment, made him one of the most dangerous gods in the pantheon. Not because he was evil, but because he was unstable. Because you never knew which Poseidon you were dealing with, the creative god who gave humanity horses, or the vengeful god who would kill you and everyone you loved for forgetting to sacrifice properly. Let's talk about Poseidon's relationships, because they reveal even more about his character. Unlike Zeus, who pursued every attractive mortal and goddess he encountered, Poseidon's affairs were different, more violent, more possessive, more about claiming and conquering than seduction. He pursued Medusa in Athena's temple, an act so blasphemous that Athena transformed Medusa into a monster as punishment, punishing the victim because she couldn't directly punish Poseidon. He pursued the nymph Caenis, and when she asked to be transformed into a man so she would never be vulnerable again, he granted it, creating Caeneus, one of the few transgender figures in Greek mythology. He pursued Demeter, who transformed herself into a mare to escape him, so he transformed himself into a stallion and caught her anyway. The result of that union was Arion, a divine horse who could speak, and Despoina, a goddess whose name literally means the mistress, because her true name was too sacred to speak.
Do you see the pattern? Poseidon didn't court, he didn't seduce, he pursued and claimed and conquered. His relationships were acts of power, demonstrations of his ability to have what he wanted regardless of consent or consequences. And this wasn't seen as particularly unusual in Greek mythology, where gods regularly assaulted mortals and faced minimal consequences. But Poseidon's behavior stood out even in that context for its aggression, its entitlement, its complete disregard for anyone's wishes except his own. He was the god who took what he wanted and then got angry when people were upset about it. The god who demanded respect while showing none. The god who wanted to be honored as a creator and protector while acting like a destroyer and a predator. But Poseidon wasn't always the antagonist. Sometimes, rarely, he could be an ally. He supported the Greeks during the Trojan War, still holding his grudge against Troy for Laomedon's betrayal decades earlier. He helped heroes who showed him proper respect. He protected sailors who sacrificed to him faithfully. He could be generous when he chose to be, could use his power to help rather than harm. The problem was that his generosity was as unpredictable as his rage. You could do everything right, offer perfect sacrifices, show absolute reverence, and still face his wrath if he happened to be in a bad mood, or if someone he was feuding with liked you. Poseidon was the god of the sea, and he was like the sea. Sometimes calm and giving, sometimes violent and taking, and you never knew which you were going to encounter until you were already committed. There's a contest that perfectly encapsulates Poseidon's character, his capabilities, and his fundamental problem. Athens, the city that would become the crown jewel of Greek civilization, needed a patron god. Multiple deities wanted the honor, but it came down to two, Athena and Poseidon. Each would present a gift to the city, and the citizens would choose which god they preferred. Poseidon went first. He struck the ground with his trident, and a spring erupted from the earth. Water, precious water, the most valuable resource in the Mediterranean world. Except Poseidon's gift had a problem. The water was salt water, useless for drinking, useless for irrigation, a promise of abundance that delivered nothing practical. It was Poseidon in physical form, impressive, powerful, ultimately not helpful because he hadn't thought through what people actually needed. Athena's gift was an olive tree, simple, practical. The tree would produce olives for food, oil for cooking and light, wood for building. It would multiply, create more trees, sustain the city for generations. It was everything Poseidon's gift wasn't. Thoughtful, useful, designed with the actual needs of mortals in mind. The citizens chose Athena. They named their city Athens. And Poseidon, furious at being rejected, flooded the plains surrounding Athens in revenge. He sent a tsunami to punish them for choosing wisdom over power, for valuing practicality over spectacle. He proved exactly why they were right to choose Athena, because he couldn't handle rejection, couldn't accept that his impressive display of power mattered less than Athena's practical contribution, couldn't understand that being powerful doesn't automatically make you worthy of worship. This is Poseidon at his most honest. The god who could reshape geography, who commanded the seas and earthquakes, who literally helped overthrow the Titans, reduced to throwing a tantrum because a city didn't choose him. The god who gave humanity horses but couldn't give Athens drinkable water. The god who was capable of great creativity but couldn't think beyond his own ego long enough to consider what others actually needed. And his response to rejection wasn't introspection or growth or learning. It was violence. It was punishment. It was making sure everyone knew that even though they didn't choose him, they would still suffer his wrath. That's not the behavior of a mature deity. That's the behavior of a child who never learned that other people's needs and desires matter as much as his own.
But let's consider Poseidon's perspective for a moment, because understanding doesn't require excusing, and there's something almost tragic about his endless frustration. He wasn't wrong that he was powerful. He wasn't wrong that he was essential. The seas covered more of the earth than land did. His domain was vast beyond measure. He could create earthquakes that destroyed cities, storms that swallowed fleets, tsunamis that rewrote coastlines. He was, in purely objective terms, just as powerful as Zeus, maybe more powerful in some ways, because Zeus couldn't make the earth shake. Zeus couldn't control the oceans. Zeus had the sky, but Poseidon had everything below it. And yet, despite all that power, despite all that capability, Zeus was king and Poseidon wasn't. The only difference was luck. A drawing of lots, a random chance that put Zeus on the throne and relegated Poseidon to second place. Imagine living with that knowledge for eternity. Imagine being powerful enough to reshape reality, essential enough that civilization depends on your goodwill, creative enough to invent revolutionary gifts like horses, and still being second, still being overshadowed, still being the one that everyone respects out of fear, but doesn't love, doesn't celebrate, doesn't honor the way they honor Zeus. Every prayer to Zeus was a reminder that luck mattered more than merit. Every sacrifice to the king of gods was an implicit rejection of Poseidon's equal claim to authority. Every hero Zeus championed was someone Poseidon might resent. Every slight, every overlooked contribution, every moment when Zeus received credit or praise or worship was another wound added to the original injury of not being chosen as king. That's Poseidon's existence. That's the psychological prison he built for himself out of resentment and pride and the inability to accept that life, even divine life, isn't fair. And here's where the story gets really interesting. Poseidon's grudges were legendary, not just long-lasting, but multi-generational, spanning decades or even centuries. When Odysseus blinded Polyphemus, Poseidon's son, the Cyclops, Poseidon spent 10 years making Odysseus's journey home as miserable as possible. Storms, shipwrecks, the death of all his men, endless suffering, all because Odysseus had defended himself against a monster who was eating his crew. Poseidon didn't care about context or justification. His son had been hurt, therefore whoever hurt him must suffer for a decade. That's not justice. That's not even proportionate revenge. That's obsession. That's the inability to let anything go, to forgive any slight, to move past any injury, real or perceived. The same pattern played out with Troy. Laomedon's betrayal happened generations before the Trojan War, but Poseidon still held the grudge, still supported the Greeks, still worked to destroy the city he had helped build decades earlier. The Trojans who died in that war had nothing to do with Laomedon's broken oath. They were innocent of the crime Poseidon was punishing. But Poseidon didn't care. The city had wronged him once, therefore the city must be destroyed, regardless of who currently lived there or whether they bore any responsibility for the original offense. This is what made Poseidon so dangerous, not just his power, but his absolute refusal to let go of anything. Every slight became eternal. Every injury became a wound that never healed. Every moment of disrespect became a justification for violence that lasted generations. But there's another side to Poseidon that gets overlooked in all the stories of rage and revenge. He was the protector of sailors, not just their tormentor, but also their guardian. Before any voyage, sailors would sacrifice to Poseidon, asking for calm seas and safe passage, and often he granted it. When sailors showed proper respect, when they acknowledged his power and made appropriate offerings, Poseidon could be generous, could calm storms, could guide ships through dangerous waters, could ensure that voyages succeeded. He was both the greatest threat and the greatest hope for anyone who ventured onto his domain. You had to appease him, yes, but if you did, if you played by his rules and showed the deference he demanded, he would protect you. That's a very different dynamic than Zeus's rule. Zeus demanded worship, but his protection was inconsistent. Poseidon demanded respect, but if you gave it, genuinely gave it, he would honor that exchange.
This duality, this capacity to be both protector and destroyer, made Poseidon central to Greek maritime culture in ways that went beyond simple fear. He was the god you negotiated with every time you went to sea, the god whose temperament you tried to read through signs and omens, the god who could kill you instantly or carry you safely home. And the difference between those outcomes often came down to whether you had shown proper respect. It was a relationship, complicated and dangerous as relationships with volatile people always are, but a relationship nonetheless. Not the distant authority of Zeus, not the grim inevitability of Hades, but something more immediate and personal. Poseidon was there, in every wave, in every storm, in every moment of danger or triumph on the water.
You couldn't ignore him. You couldn't take him for granted. You had to engage with him constantly and hope that your engagement was enough to earn protection rather than wrath. Now let's talk about what Poseidon represents psychologically, because gods are more than just powerful beings in stories. They're projections of human fears and desires, personifications of natural forces and emotional truths. Poseidon is the god of the uncontrolled masculine, the power that never learned restraint, the strength that never developed wisdom. He's what happens when capability and creativity exist without emotional maturity. He can create horses and build cities, but he can't control his temper. He can reshape the earth and command the seas, but he can't let go of grievances. He has all the tools for greatness except the one that matters most: the ability to grow beyond his wounds, to process his resentment, to become something more than the sum of his traumas and disappointments. In this sense, Poseidon is a warning, a cautionary tale about what happens when you never move past your anger, never work through your sense of unfairness, never learn that power without wisdom is just destruction wearing a crown. Zeus, for all his flaws, at least understood politics. He knew how to build alliances, make compromises, maintain authority through more than just threats. Hades understood duty and accepted his role even though he didn't want it. Athena embodied strategic thinking and planned ahead. But Poseidon? Poseidon was pure reaction, pure emotion, pure id wearing divine form. He wanted what he wanted when he wanted it, and consequences were something that happened to other people. That made him powerful, yes. It made him feared, absolutely. But it also made him fundamentally limited in ways that someone with his capabilities should never have been. Think about how different Greek mythology would be if Poseidon had been chosen as king instead of Zeus. If the lots had fallen differently and the god of the seas had ruled from Olympus while Zeus commanded the waters. Would Poseidon have been a better king? Almost certainly not. He lacked the political acumen, the strategic patience, the ability to think long-term that kingship required. He would have ruled through violence and intimidation, would have created a reign of terror rather than a cosmic order. Zeus was far from perfect, but he understood that maintaining power required more than just having it, required building systems and hierarchies and giving other gods enough authority that they had stakes in preserving the order rather than overthrowing it. Poseidon never learned that lesson, never understood that real power, lasting power, requires that you give some of it away. He wanted to hoard everything, control everything, dominate everything. And that approach works in the short term, but creates nothing sustainable. The drawing of lots that made Zeus king and Poseidon the god of the seas might have been arbitrary, but the result was probably the best possible outcome. Not because Zeus deserved it more, but because Poseidon deserved it less. But there's something almost sympathetic about Poseidon despite everything, something human in his endless frustration. Haven't we all felt overlooked? Haven't we all experienced moments where we did everything right, contributed our best, gave generously, and still watched someone else receive the recognition we thought we deserved? Haven't we all struggled with resentment, with the sense that life isn't fair, that merit doesn't always win, that sometimes luck matters more than effort? Poseidon's flaw isn't that he felt these things. His flaw is that he never moved past them, never learned to find satisfaction in his own accomplishments regardless of external validation, never understood that his constant comparison with Zeus was poisoning his own existence, making it impossible to enjoy his vast domain and incredible power because he was too busy resenting what he didn't have.
This is the lesson Poseidon never learned, but teaches us through his failure. You can be powerful, creative, essential, capable of extraordinary things, and still be miserable if you can't let go of what you're not. Poseidon ruled the seas, commanded earthquakes, created horses, shaped civilization itself. Those accomplishments should have been enough, should have brought satisfaction and pride and a sense of purpose. But they weren't enough for Poseidon because he measured himself against Zeus rather than against his own potential. He defined success as being king rather than as being excellent at whatever he actually was, and that definition of success made success impossible, made contentment impossible, made peace impossible, turned his entire eternal existence into one long tantrum about not getting the throne. The irony is that if Poseidon had simply accepted his domain, embraced his role, focused on being the best possible god of the seas rather than the god who should have been king, he might have been happier, might have been more respected, might have been remembered as something other than the volatile, dangerous god that everyone feared but nobody loved. Hades shows us what acceptance looks like, how you can take a bad situation and make it meaningful through dedication and duty. Hestia shows us how you can find peace by opting out of competition entirely. But Poseidon shows us the opposite, how you can have everything and nothing simultaneously if you can't appreciate what you have because you're obsessed with what you don't. The seas still rage when storms come. The earth still shakes when tectonic plates shift. These are Poseidon's domain in physical form. Powerful, dangerous, essential to the planet's functioning, but destructive when uncontrolled. And somewhere in myth and memory, Poseidon still sits in his underwater palace, still commands his realm, still creates and destroys with equal passion, still carries the grudge that defines him, still powerful, still essential, still bitter that he's not king. That's not villainy exactly. That's not even tragedy in the classical sense. It's something more pathetic and more recognizable. It's the waste of potential, the squandering of gifts, the inability to grow up that turns a god into something smaller than he should have been. Poseidon could have been great. He had all the tools for greatness, but greatness requires maturity, and maturity requires accepting reality as it is rather than as you wish it were. And that's the one thing Poseidon never learned to do, the one power he never mastered, the one gift he never gave himself, the ability to let go, move forward, and find peace in what he actually had, rather than eternal frustration over what he never got.